This is Job Search Reality. Todd Brooks from Athens, GA, sharing the truth about the ups and downs of trying to find your place. The interviews, the waiting game, the hopes and doubts we all face, but I keep moving forward every day here in Athens, GA.
Welcome back to the Job Search Reality Series podcast. I'm Todd Brooks, coming to you from beautiful Athens, Georgia. And today, I want to ask a pretty simple question. What in the world is going on with the American job market? Because depending on what you read on social media, apparently all the following things are happening at the exact same time. We're losing jobs. Companies supposedly can't find workers. People are applying to hundreds of jobs and can't get hired. We're talking about potentially raising the federal minimum wage to $25 an hour. Social media is telling young people which degrees billionaires have. Other posts are telling us which careers can supposedly make you $500,000 to $700,000 a year. And meanwhile, someone who's just trying to get a regular job is sitting at their computer thinking, that's wonderful. Could somebody please just call me back? And that's the reality I want to talk about today. And this isn't just theoretical for me. I've been living through a difficult job search myself. So when I see people posting online saying, I've applied for 400 jobs, I've been unemployed for months, I've gone through 4 rounds of interviews, I don't know what else I'm supposed to do, I understand the frustration behind those words. And today, we're going to separate some of the social media hype from what the actual numbers tell us. We're going to talk about the July jobs report. We're going to talk about whether applying for a job has become unnecessarily complicated. We're going to look at those gigantic salaries you see advertised online. We're going to talk about the proposed $25 federal minimum wage. And later, we've got a follow-up from Ronald in Workplace Q&A. Now, if you remember Ronald, he's a manager whose boss's wife works underneath him. Well, Ronald took my advice. It didn't exactly go well. We've got that later. And of course, before we're finished, I've got Todd's take. So we've got a lot to talk about. Let's get started. Let's start with a big story. The July jobs report came out on Friday, August the 7th. And this is one situation where the scary looking social media post I saw wasn't making the basic headline up. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, total non-farm payroll unemployment decreased by 23,000 jobs in July. The unemployment rate was 4.1%. That's significant because when people hear that the unemployment rate is 4.1%, they might think, well, that doesn't sound terrible. And historically, 4.1% isn't some gigantic unemployment number. But there's a difference between unemployment being relatively low and the job market being good for somebody who's actually looking for a job. Those aren't necessarily the same thing. And that's something I think gets lost in these conversations. You can have a job market where most people who already have jobs are doing okay, while the person who needs to find a new job is having an absolutely miserable time. That's what I want people to understand. Because when you're unemployed and you submitted application number 147, it doesn't make you feel much better when somebody on television tells you, technically, unemployment remains relatively low. You're sitting there saying, okay, that's great. Where's my job? And another important part of the July report was the revisions. The previously reported employment numbers for May and June were revised downward by a combined 103,000 jobs. That's a substantial adjustment. So this isn't just about one disappointing month. It contributes to a broader picture of a labor market that has become considerably less dynamic. And I think that's the word we need to use, sluggish. Companies aren't necessarily firing everybody, but they're also not necessarily hiring aggressively. And that creates a terrible environment for job seekers. Because here's something people don't always understand. You don't need massive layoffs to create a bad job market. You can create one simply by having companies stop hiring. Think about musical chairs. You don't necessarily have to remove 20 chairs. If everybody stops getting out of their chair, the person standing up still doesn't have anywhere to sit. That's essentially what can happen in a low hiring economy. And I think that's part of what we're experiencing. And this brings me to another image I saw online. It compared applying for jobs in different eras. Now, I want to be clear. This is a social media graphic. I'm not presenting these specific examples as historical research. It's satire. But sometimes satire hits a nerve because there's a little truth buried underneath it. The graphic basically says 1995. You apply, you're qualified, you interview, you're hired. Then it jumps forward to 2026. Now you've got 1,200 applicants. Upload your resume. Now type everything from your resume into another form. Complete an assessment. Take a personality test. Interview again. Interview with somebody else's boss. Interview with that boss's boss. Wait 2 weeks. And then nothing. Not even a rejection email. Somewhere out there is a candidate who has completed 7 interviews and is still waiting to meet the company goldfish. We just want to make sure Bubbles feels like you're a cultural fit. And that's funny until you've actually lived through it. Then it's not very funny anymore. Even the federal government's own USA Jobs guidance acknowledges that a hiring process can involve multiple interview rounds. And private sector hiring can add assessments, screening calls, automated interviews, and other layers. We're also seeing AI enter the process. Interestingly, AI interviews aren't automatically worse. A recent large field experiment involving roughly 70,000 applicants found applicants interviewed by AI voice agents were actually more likely to receive job offers in that particular experiment. So I'm not going to sit here and say AI hiring equals bad. That's too simplistic. The bigger issue is what happens to the human being navigating the system. Does the technology make hiring faster, more objective, more accessible? Great. Or does it simply create another gate candidates have to get through? That's the question. And there's another issue. Ghost jobs. Jobs that appear to be available even though an employer isn't seriously trying to fill them have become enough of a concern that Indeed recently published guidance specifically addressing the issue and says postings on its platforms must correspond to genuine hiring intent. There has even been academic research attempting to quantify ghost job postings, although estimates vary and the methodology is still developing. So when job seekers tell me, Todd, I don't even know if some of these jobs are real, I'm not going to dismiss that frustration. We're going to take our first commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk about something else social media loves, money. We're going to look at those lists of America's highest paying jobs and ask the question that usually gets left out. What does it actually take to get one of those jobs? And after that, we're talking about billionaire college degrees because apparently we finally discovered the secret to becoming a billionaire. Just major in business administration. Who knew? I'm Todd Brooks. You're listening to the Job Search Reality Series podcast. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm Todd Brooks, and this is the Job Search Reality Series podcast. Before the break, we were talking about why finding a job in 2026 can feel so difficult even when unemployment statistics don't necessarily scream crisis. Now let's talk about the other side of employment. How much can you make? I saw another graphic recently claiming to show the 20 highest paying careers in 2026. So that graphic claimed to show the 20 highest paying careers this year. You've probably seen these. Neurosurgeon, thoracic surgeon, orthopedic surgeon, radiologist, cardiologist, anesthesiologist, AI engineer, cloud architect, investment banker, corporate attorney, and some of these graphics attach absolutely enormous salaries. And here's where social media drives me crazy. Technically, somebody somewhere may earn the number they're quoting, but that doesn't necessarily make it a useful representation of what you are going to earn. That's the nuance. If somebody says, become a surgeon and make hundreds of thousands of dollars, okay. But there's one small detail missing. You have to become a surgeon. It's not, Todd, I noticed you have some management experience. Would you be interested in neurosurgery? And then I'd respond, absolutely. When do I start? Monday. Medical school, residency, licensing, specialization, years of training, potentially enormous educational costs, long hours, enormous responsibility. That's part of the story too. Same thing with airline pilots. Same thing with attorneys. Same thing with high-end technology positions. A salary number without context isn't career advice. It's just a number. And this matters because somebody who's struggling financially can see these graphics and start thinking, I chose the wrong career. Maybe, but maybe not. Your career isn't unsuccessful simply because somebody else makes more money. Compensation is one factor. So is stability. So is work-life balance. So is job availability. So is geography. So is the cost of acquiring the qualifications. That's a conversation I'd rather have. And then I found another graphic. This one supposedly shows the most common college degrees among billionaires: business administration, engineering, computer science, finance, economics, law, marketing, international business, psychology, physics, and again, interesting. But what exactly are we supposed to conclude from that? Because if 21% of billionaires study business administration, that does not mean 21% of business administration majors become billionaires. Those are two completely different statistics. That's like saying a lot of professional basketball players are tall. Therefore, if you're 6'5", congratulations on your NBA contract. That's not how probability works. And there's something else those lists don't show. Family wealth, connections, timing, geography, risk, luck, access to capital. The business people started. The opportunities available when they started them. And probably about 300 other variables. Education matters. But I worry when we turn education into a lottery ticket. Get this degree and you'll be rich. That's not fair to students. A better question is, what skills does this education give you? And where are those skills actually in demand? That's useful career planning. Now let's move from people potentially earning hundreds of thousands of dollars to the opposite end of the wage spectrum, because there's a serious proposal in Washington that has generated a lot of conversation. Senator Chris Murphy introduced the Living Wage for All Act, which would ultimately increase the federal minimum wage to $25 an hour. And no, the proposal does not mean everybody suddenly starts making $25 tomorrow. The legislation calls for a phased approach. It would initially raise the federal minimum to $12, with large corporate employers eventually reaching $25 by 2032 and smaller employers having until 2039. After reaching the target, the wage floor would be tied to 2/3 of the national median wage. That's an important distinction. Now, I'm not going to turn this into a partisan political discussion. This is a job show. So let's talk about it as an employment issue. The argument for a substantially higher minimum wage is straightforward. People working full-time need enough money to live. Housing costs more. Food costs more. Transportation costs more. Healthcare costs more. And supporters of this bill argue that millions of American workers are simply not earning enough. The bill's sponsors estimate that about 45% of American workers earn less than $25 an hour. That's one side. But there's another side. If labor suddenly becomes substantially more expensive, what happens to businesses that operate on narrow margins? Do they raise prices, reduce hours, hire fewer workers, automate more? Can a huge corporation absorb that differently from a locally owned restaurant? Those are legitimate questions, and that's presumably one reason the proposal gives smaller businesses a much longer phase-in. This is exactly why employment policy is complicated. You can have a goal that sounds wonderful. Everybody deserves better wages. But then you still have to answer, how do we get there without unintentionally reducing opportunities for the people we're trying to help? That's the policy debate. And I think we need to be capable of discussing both sides without immediately screaming at each other. We're going to take another quick commercial break. And when we come back, it's time for Workplace Q&A. Last week, Ronald told us that his boss's wife worked underneath him and seemed to receive privileges nobody else received. I told Ronald, talk to your boss, be professional, focus on morale, don't make it personal. And Ronald listened to me. His boss apparently did not appreciate my brilliant management consulting. Ronald wrote back, and we're going to find out what happened next. I'm Todd Brooks. This is a Job Search Reality Series podcast. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Workplace Q&A. Last week we heard from Ronald in Porterville, California. Ronald is a customer service manager at a small company. His boss is the sales manager, and his boss's wife works directly under Ronald. Ronald told us she frequently received privileges other employees didn't receive. Leaving early, taking time off, running personal errands, generally having considerably more flexibility. And Ronald was concerned because his employees were noticing. My advice was pretty simple. Don't make it personal. Talk professionally with your boss about the effect it's having on the team. Ask for clarification. Well, Ronald apparently took my advice, and he's written back. Let's read his email. Todd, thanks for answering my question last week. After hearing your response, I decided I needed to talk to my boss. I didn't accuse his wife of doing anything wrong. I tried to handle it the way you suggested. I explained that some employees were noticing how much flexibility she receives with her schedule and that people were beginning to feel like there were two sets of rules. I told him I was worried about morale. His response surprised me. He basically told me he doesn't care what the other employees think. He said his wife has worked for the company much longer than most of them, has years of experience, and has authority within the company that the other employees don't have. He told me if employees don't like how much time she takes off or the flexibility she receives, that's their problem. He said that he said what she does isn't any of their business. I tried explaining that I'm managing these employees and I'm the person hearing the complaints. His response was basically, I don't care what they say. Now I feel like I'm in an even worse position. I'm supposed to manage this team and maintain morale, but my boss has essentially told me that one employee is going to have different rules because she's his wife, she's been there longer, and she has more authority. Todd, where do I go from here? Do I keep trying to address this, or do I accept that this is how the company operates? So I think at this point, it's probably better to actually hear the actual video itself. So we're going to go ahead and go to the audio clip of this, and then we'll be right back. Welcome back to Workplace Q&A. Last week, we heard from Ronald in Porterville, California. Ronald is a customer service manager at a small company. His boss is a sales manager, and his boss's wife happens to work directly under Ronald. Ronald told us that she frequently receives privileges that other employees don't receive. She can leave early, take time off, run personal errands during the workday, and generally has considerably more flexibility than everybody else. Ronald was concerned because his other employees were noticing. My advice to Ronald was pretty straightforward. Don't make it personal. Talk professionally with your boss about the effect it's having on the team and ask for clarification about expectations. Well, Ronald took my advice, and he has written me back. So let's read his follow-up. Ronald's follow-up email, basically reads like this. So he writes, Todd, thanks for answering my question last week. After hearing your response, I decided that I needed to talk to my boss. I didn't accuse his wife of doing anything wrong. I tried to handle it exactly the way that you suggested. I told him that some of the employees had started noticing how much flexibility his wife receives with her schedule. I explained that people were beginning to feel like there were two different sets of rules, one for her and one for everybody else. I told him I was concerned about what it was doing to morale. His response surprised me. He basically told me that he doesn't care what the other employees think. He said his wife has worked for the company much longer than most of them, has years of experience, and has authority within the company that the other employees don't have. He told me that if employees don't like the amount of time she takes off or the flexibility she receives, that's their problem. He also said that what she does isn't any of their business. I tried explaining that I'm the person managing these employees, so I'm the one hearing their complaints. His response was basically, I don't care what they say. Now I feel like I'm in an even worse position. I'm supposed to manage this team and maintain morale, but my boss has essentially told me that one employee is going to have different rules because she's his wife, she's been there longer, and she has more authority. Todd, where do I go from here? Do I keep trying to address this, or do I just accept that this is how the company operates? Ronald from Porterville, California. Wow, Ronald, this is a bad position to be in, buddy. I'm really feel for you. But let me just try to answer this email the best I can. So, Ronald, you did what I suggested. And unfortunately, you got an answer. And it was an answer that you didn't want to hear. It just wasn't the answer you wanted. And there's actually an important distinction here. Your boss may be completely correct about one thing. Not every employee has to have identical privileges. Seniority matters. Position matters. Responsibilities matter. Someone who's been with a company for 15 years may legitimately have benefits or flexibility that somebody who's been there for 6 months doesn't have. And if his wife genuinely has greater authority within the organization, that matters too. So I'm not going to automatically say she's getting something different, therefore it's favoritism. It's more complicated than that. But here's where I have a problem. The statement, I don't care what the employees think. That's where you've lost me. Because if you're responsible for leading people, you should care what your employees think. That doesn't mean employees get to dictate company policy. It doesn't mean every complaint is legitimate. And it certainly doesn't mean everyone gets whatever they want. But morale matters. Perception matters. Consistency matters. And communication matters. But there's another problem. Ronald, your boss has put you in an almost impossible management position. You're apparently responsible for managing his wife, but are you actually allowed to manage her? Think about that distinction. If you're responsible for her performance, but can't question her schedule, if you're responsible for attendance, but can't address her attendance, if you're responsible for enforcing policies, but don't have the authority to enforce those policies with one particular employee, then you're not really managing that employee. You're managing everybody else. And she happens to appear on your organizational chart. That is a completely different situation. And here's where it gets awkward. Let's just throw a little humor into this. Imagine that you're sitting in a staff meeting. Okay, everybody, here are the attendance policies. Employees raise their hand. Does that apply to everybody? Well, everybody whose last name isn't the same as my boss's. that's probably not going into the employee handbook. There's probably not a section that says attendance policy, see page 14. Boss's spouse, yeah, don't worry about it. But that's exactly why family relationships inside businesses can become incredibly complicated. So what would I do now? Ronald, I wouldn't keep fighting the same battle. You've raised the concern. Your boss gave you an answer. At this point, repeatedly confronting him probably isn't going to accomplish anything. Instead, I'd ask for something much more important. Clarification of your authority. I'd say something like, I understand your position going forward, but I just need clarification about what decisions regarding her schedule, attendance, and responsibilities are actually mine to make. That's not confrontational. That's management. Because you need to know where your authority begins and where it ends. And I document that clarification. Not because you're trying to build some secret case against your employer, but simply because 6 months from now, somebody may ask, why didn't you address this? And you need to be able to explain, I did. This was the direction I received. The bigger lesson here, here's what I want everybody listening to understand. Responsibility without authority is one of the worst positions a manager can be placed in. If a company holds you accountable for results, it needs to give you enough authority to achieve those results. Otherwise, you're basically being handed the steering wheel while somebody else controls the gas and the brake. And when that car crashes, everybody asks why you didn't steer better. Ronald, I think you've learned something important about your company. Your boss has told you how he intends to operate. Now you have to decide whether you can successfully manage within that structure. And that's a very different question from the one that you asked us last week. Welcome back. Okay, so now that you've heard the audio, just think for just a minute. Imagine the staff meeting. Okay, everybody, we're reviewing our attendance policy. Somebody raises their hand. Todd, does this apply to everybody? Absolutely, everybody. Well, everybody who isn't married to upper management. You're probably not putting that in the employee handbook. Page 17, attendance and leave policy. Page 18, management spouses. Just mind your business. That's the problem. Family-run businesses can be wonderful, but family relationships can create very complicated reporting structures. So, Ronald, I wouldn't keep fighting the same argument. You've raised it. You've received direction. Instead, I'd ask your boss to clarify something much more important. And you can say, I understand your position. Going forward, I need clarification about which decisions regarding her attendance, schedule, and responsibilities are mine to make. That's professional, and I document the answer, not because you're secretly preparing for some lawsuit, because you're a manager. If somebody comes back 6 days later and says, Ronald, why didn't you address this? You need to be able to explain. I've raised the concern and followed the direction I was given. That's protecting yourself professionally. And there's a broader management lesson here. Responsibility without authority is a terrible position for a manager. If you're responsible for the results, you need enough authority to produce those results. Otherwise, somebody hands you the steering wheel while they control the accelerator and brakes. Then the car crashes, and they ask, Ronald, what happened? That's not management. That's setting somebody up for failure. Ronald, thank you for following up, and I hope you'll write us again, because now I really want to know what happens next. If you have a workplace question for a future workplace Q&A, email jobsearchrealityseries@gmail.com. Names, locations, and identifying information can always be changed for privacy. I'm Todd Brooks, and that was Workplace Q&A. We're heading into our final commercial break. When we come back, I'm going to bring all this together. The week jobs report, the $25 wage debate, AI, ghost jobs, the endless application process, $700,000 careers, billionaire college degrees, And Ronald trying to manage somebody he's apparently not even allowed to manage, or somebody he's apparently not actually allowed to manage. There's only one way to finish this episode. It's time for Todd's Take. I'm Todd Brooks. You're listening to the Job Search Reality Series podcast. We'll be right back. Welcome back, and it's time for Todd's Take. Here's what strikes me about everything we've discussed today. We're living in a very strange economy. Somebody can open Facebook or Instagram and within 5 minutes be told, surgeons make $700,000. Business majors become billionaires. The minimum wage should eventually be $25 an hour. America lost jobs last month. Companies can't find workers. Job seekers can't find companies willing to hire them. AI is supposedly taking jobs. AI is helping companies hire people. And if you want one of the jobs that supposedly exists, please upload your resume. Then type everything that's already on your resume into 37 little boxes. Then take a personality test. Todd, which statement describes you better? A, I enjoy working with others. B, I occasionally fantasize about throwing the office printer through a window. How long have I been unemployed when I'm answering this question? Because that's going to be my answer. Then comes the interview. Then the second interview. Then the panel interview. Then the final interview. Then the final interview. Then we're going in another direction. Which direction? Narnia. Because you've apparently disappeared. And sometimes between all those headlines is reality. That's why I started the Job Search Reality Series, because behind every employment statistic is an actual person. Someone trying to pay rent, someone supporting children, someone rebuilding a career. That's the classification that I fall into mainly. Someone who's been laid off, I also fall into that classification. Someone who's applied for 200 jobs, I think I'm up to 700 now. Someone who went through 3 interviews and thought, this is finally it, and then never heard from the company again. Those people aren't statistics. They're people. And I think companies need to remember that. But job seekers need to remember something too. Don't allow this market to convince you that rejection determines your value. There are too many variables involved. Timing, competition, the one we really don't like, algorithms, internal candidates, which is another one I really don't like because I feel like you just don't get a good chance to present yourself in front of a potential employer. Budget changes, hiring freezes, qualifications, background checks, company politics, and sometimes a job that apparently wasn't going to be filled in the first place. You control only part of that equation, so control your part. Improve your resume, learn how applicant tracking systems work, build relationships, network, practice interviewing, develop new skills, apply strategically, follow up appropriately, and keep looking. But don't spend 8 hours every day repeatedly clicking easy apply and assume volume alone is a strategy. The job search has changed. Our strategy has to change with it. And employers, you've got responsibilities too. If you're not hiring, don't advertise a job. If somebody interviews 4 times, tell them what happened. If an algorithm rejects somebody, make sure the algorithm isn't replacing common sense. If you're asking candidates to invest hours of their lives in your hiring process, treat their time like it matters, because it does. And maybe that's the common thread connecting today's entire episode. People want to feel like they matter. The worker earning $12 an hour wants to matter. The unemployed applicant wants to matter. The manager trying to maintain morale wants to matter. And the employee watching the boss's spouse get different treatment wants to know that the rules matter. That's not entitlement. That's human nature. And I think sometimes we've made employment so focused on systems, metrics, algorithms, productivity, applications, and policies that we've forgotten the actual people. And that's Todd's Take. That's going to do it for this episode of the Job Search Reality Series podcast. I'd love to hear what you think. Do you think finding a job has become unnecessarily complicated? Have you encountered a job posting you suspected wasn't really being filled? What's the most interviews you've ever completed for one position? And what do you think about the proposal to eventually raise the federal minimum wage to $25 an hour? There's plenty to debate here. And remember, if you've got a workplace situation for Workplace Q&A, send your question to jobsearchrealityseries@gmail.com. Your name, location, and identifying information can be changed. And Ronald, if you're listening, we're going to need part 3. Thank you for spending part of your day with me. If you enjoyed today's show, subscribe, follow, share the episode with somebody going through a job search, and join me again for the next episode. I'm Todd Brooks, also known as Todd Brooks from Athens, Georgia. This has been the Job Search Reality Series podcast. Until next time, keep moving forward, keep learning, and remember, your job search is part of your story. It doesn't have to be the end of it. I'll see you next time.
Just waiting on that call to come through. Feels like I'm hovering in the Athens blue. All these interviews and empty spaces, looking for foundation, not just traces. I'm ready to build my nest and settle down, find my own place to land in this classic city town.